I notice, like, at the tree line, there's a set of 3 lights in a triangular formation. And the lights look like they're pretty big. And I'm like, oh man, that plane is really low to the ground because
There's a force in all of us that science knows nothing about. It's fear.
To Induced Fear. I'm your host, Oscar, and with me I have Jeff Foran of Strangeology. How's it going, man?
hey, it's going well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I've actually, like, a long time ago, I think I sent in a story for your show a long time ago, I want to say. I think when I first started this. And since then, I've really seen yours, like, take off, especially on TikTok, man. It's been, like, crazy to see the growth and the response that you get on your videos.
Yeah, it's a really interesting culture and dynamic on TikTok for, talking about what I talk about, the strange and the unexplained, over on TikTok, and especially versus like other social media communities as well. I'm everywhere, but TikTok seems to really get a lot of traction for weird stuff. There's a lot of people who are very much into that kind of stuff and weird theories and things like that, so it keeps things super fun a lot of the times.
Yeah, I notice in your comments a lot. If I see a video, I notice in the comments, well, it's like this person throwing out this theory and somebody saying, no, it's not that, it's this. And it's like everybody seems to have like the answers.
Yeah. There a lot of people do seem to have the answers. It's especially funny talking about anything like space related or world related, and then you get the inevitable firmament comments and stuff like that. And you're you're like, no. But yeah.
Yeah, I definitely saw it when you were talking about the drones that were going on. It was a ton of people.
Yeah. The whole drones thing was such a very an interesting event that was going on, and I think it's still going on to some extent. I know that the White House recently came out with the press briefing. I believe it was last week now at this point. I've lost track of time. But they're basically like, oh, everything was authorized by AA. And if it wasn't, it was hobbyists flying drones, and things just kind of spiraled out of control. But, that's kind of a cop-out answer, especially considering that, public servants and, government officials, the FBI, even the FAA were like, oh, we don't know what these are. So clearly there was like, something else going on there. But then people were seeing the plasmoid balls flying around that seemed that the drones were studying or trying to interact with. And some of them were getting knocked out of the sky by these plasmoid things, which, I mean, we can go on a whole rabbit hole about that if you want. But yeah.
Yeah, it was a ton of stuff. I mean, I even had like a few things happen. Well, people just posting videos from around here. It was like, all of these drones are happening over here, and I was like, well, over there in that area is a military base, so we could have some tie there. My mind always goes to military when it comes to those type of things.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I mean, there was the big story about, and I can't remember the name of the base off the top of my head right now. But not last year, but in 2023, there was a like 17-day period where there's, like a highly sensitive United States Air Force installation that had all these ongoing drone incursions over this, 2.5 week period. And nobody knew what they were. If they were actually drones, if they were a foreign adversary, if it was experimental tech, if it was non-human intelligence, off-world vehicles, something like that. But it's not exactly a new story. This is something that has been continuing to happen. And if
Yeah.
you look at, orbs, plasmoids, and stuff like that, that goes back way further back in history. You got Foo Fighters from World War II. You can even look back to the battle over Nuremberg in Germany back in the 1500s, where there's that famous painting of all these like balls like
Yeah.
going back and forth, battling each other. And I think there's stuff that's even older than that. So there's something strange that's been, I think with us for a while that,
Yeah.
they're
I
trying
mean,
to keep
they
things
just
hush
have
hush about.
we just have more people with their phones out constantly. So now it's more that we actually see more and more of these things. It's not just written down stories from things.
Yes, a lot more people, have access to semi decent cameras. Not everyone has a Samsung, that's supposed to have the best quality on a cell phone.
Yeah.
But even then, a lot of these things are seen at night, and night photography is incredibly difficult, especially with a cell phone. Even if you have a professional grade camera that costs you $10,000, you're not going to be able to get the shot that everyone expects. And even if it was like an incredible, smoking gun of an image, people are going to be like, oh, it's AI, it's CGI, it's photoshopped, what have you. So
Yeah.
it's going to get harder and harder, I think, for people to be willing to accept that there might be something else going on that doesn't fit their worldview.
Yeah. Now, what was the main thing that like pulled you into this world?
Oh gosh, I mean that's a story that goes back to childhood, really. I always found myself gravitating towards books and TV specials and stuff like that about all this kind of subject matter. In elementary school, I would go into the school library, and I remember seeing books on Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and UFO cases from like the 50s and 60s, like these really old books. I'm a child of the 80s, if you couldn't tell, but it's something that's always been with me. My mother had a few of I think they were Time Life books that there were a couple that had like ancient world mysteries, and she had one that had like alien UFO encounters, that was like a mail order book that you'd get. It's funny because I saw some people talking about these books recently on TikTok, and I was like, what the? I was like just thinking about these the other day. It's kind of a strange synchronicity, but yeah, I remember always checking those books out on the bookshelf at home growing up, being incredibly freaked out by an alien encounter like painting in one of these books, that this couple was like stopped in the middle of the road, and there was a UFO parked in the road in front of them, and there was this like red-eyed humanoid alien like up on the windshield like looking in at them. It's like,
Oh man.
I don't think it was the Benny Barty Hill case, but kind of a similar vibe to that case. But yeah,
That's where my mind went.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's always been something that's fascinated me. Kind of like a feeling that there's something else in the world going on, other different phenomena that science can't explain yet. And just being always interested in that world. And coupled with that, having my own experiences growing up, things that have happened in my life that, couldn't really be explained by conventional means, I wouldn't think, at least.
And what were those experiences, if you don't mind sharing?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Well, I've told this story before to many people, I think, but the home I grew up in, I would say was very much a haunted house. It wasn't even that old of a house. I grew up there in the mid '80s through the '90s. The house was only built in the early '70s, but growing up there, if you were ever home alone, it always felt like there was a presence kind of watching you. My biggest, I would say probably like the biggest experience that made me realize like, oh, there's like something weird happening, was when I was about like 7, 8, 9 years old, and it was getting towards the end of the night. I was watching like Looney Tunes or some kind of, old cartoon reruns on TV in the living room. And my mom was in the kitchen and she's like, Jeff, it's time for bed. Go brush your teeth or whatever. And I was like, okay. So I turned off the TV, and this was, early 1990s. My family had like one big CRT, 150-pound TV in the living room. And when you turn those old TVs off, if anyone's not familiar with those old style cathode ray tube TVs, they had an afterglow on the screen when you turn them off. And sometimes you could see like an image of like what was on the screen as you turned it off. And so I'm watching like, I want to say it was like Tom and Jerry or something like that. And I turn it off and I look at the screen, and it wasn't a commercial break or anything like that. And I looked at the screen, and there was the face of an elderly looking man looking right back at me. And I was just like, what is that? And it looked like he had glasses, male pattern baldness, probably about his mid 60s. And I was just like, nope. And I just like, power walked out of the living room and went on with the rest of my evening to get ready for bed. Now, sometime later, I was looking through an old like family photo album, and I see a picture of my dad's dad, my grandpa John, and looked exactly like him. Now, my grandpa John passed away from cancer just a couple months right after I was born, so I never got to meet him. If I was a baby, I wouldn't have remembered him anyway. But thinking back, I'm just like, well, maybe he was just kind of checking in on me. Which was a really interesting experience to reflect on. And there were some other strange things that happened in that house as well. As it turned out, the people who built the house, they had a son who had graduated high school sometime in the late 1970s, I believe. And right after he graduated, he died in a motorcycle accident. And there was a mischievous presence in the house, let's say, that would shake the beds of like my parents' bed or my brother's bed, call out their names in the middle of the night, like disembodied voice style, make rooms like super duper cold in like summertime. And so, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff like that happened. And there was an instance where my dad, he told me this like years after it happened, that he woke up in the middle of the night. His room was freezing. His bed was shaking, and like he heard this disembodied voice say his name. And he was like, he had this theory that it was the spirit of this kid who grew up in the house and tragically passed away in a motorcycle accident. And he called out this person's name. I'm not going to say it, but he was like, hey, like, I got work in the morning. Like, I don't want to play. I'm done with this. This needs to stop. And like immediately, like the bed stopped shaking, the room warmed up, and he didn't experience any other strange activity like that ever since.
Oh, wow.
Super interesting. There was another thing that was super weird that happened once, and this was a little bit, I think, later when I was like a teenager, where in our living room we had like a fireplace in there that had a mantle over it. My mom had all sorts of like pictures and decorations and knickknacks and stuff like that all over it. And above that, they had this oh gosh, I don't know, like a 24 by 36 like framed painting of like a nature scene with like mallard ducks flying on it. And I remember like going to bed and the night before, and then like waking up and coming into the living room and seeing that the picture, or the portrait rather, it had fallen off the wall. But the thing is it was face down. The glass on it hadn't broken. Yes, there was carpet in the living room, but it was like a 6-foot fall. It didn't knock anything off of the mantle. The nail that it was hanging on was still in the wall at a 45-degree angle. So to me, it seemed like something lifted the portrait up off the wall and gently placed it down on the floor below. And like everyone was asleep when I went to bed the night before
Yeah.
at that point. So like, unless someone came out and like, there's really no reason to do that. But
Yeah, I was gonna
so
say why.
and then there was another instance where there was my mom, her best friend had passed away in like the year 2000, 2001, something like that. And she had a portrait of her in our like dining room area, and my mom got the like I think it was like a bouquet of flowers or something like that, and she put it on the table right in front of her friend's portrait. And her friend like hated these flowers apparently in life, and the next morning she woke up and her portrait was like face down. So yeah, like
Like
weird.
if she didn't want to see the flowers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, weird stuff like that. So yeah, there were some others like strange like Ouija board things that happened because my older sister was into Ouija boards for a while. We got this like weird prank. I don't know if it was a prank call, but they were my brother and my older sister were messing around one night, and we started getting all these calls around dinner time. And my parents like had this rule that like nobody calls the house during dinner, and like my sister answered the phone and like no one was on the other line, and then it like kept ringing, so like, and no one was ever on the other end apparently. And so I was like, oh, I want to answer it. It's like, 10-year-old Jeff. I run over and like pick up the phone, and I'm like, hello. And there's this like really like kind of like distant like voice asking, like a ghostly sounding voice is the best I can describe it, like asking for somebody named Cal. There's no one with that name in my family. And I was just like, there's no one here by that name. Bye. And like hung up. It's just like the weirdest thing. I like, maybe we're being pranked. I don't know,
Yeah.
but just the fact that happened like directly after like a Ouija board happening in my house growing up makes me wonder. But yeah. And I mean, maybe no one believes this stuff, but there was another strange experience that I had at that house growing up as well, where I was in the early 90s. My parents decided to get an above ground pool They thought it'd be great for like me and my siblings, and I used it a lot. It was fun. But I wanted to like go out swimming in the early evening, and it was summer. I don't remember what year it was, but I was, in that same age range, like 9, 10 years old. And my mom and her best friend, who had mentioned that had passed away later on, they were outside on the pool deck with me. They were chit chatting, and I was just swimming around, minding my business. And in the early evening, there were bats that would come out. I think there was like a cave somewhere in the hills where I lived that they'd come out, and they were flying around catching mosquitoes and bugs, and they would occasionally like dive down to the pool to like take a sip of water, or I don't know, maybe they were trying to get like trapped bugs too, but I don't know if bats would do that. It was probably they're probably trying to get water. But anyways, I was getting dive bombed by bats, and so I would like dive underwater to like avoid them. And I come up, and I grew up on like 5 acres of land surrounded by woods, and yes, there were houses like nearby that you could like see lights from the houses at night. But I come up out of the water, and I'm looking towards like a northeasterly direction towards like the backwoods of the property. And I see, and it's almost like a split second, I see this beach ball size kind of like warm orange ball of light zip through the woods. Like has to be maneuvering in between all the trees somehow. It's just like, and like goes towards a southwest direction. And I was just like, that was weird. I must be like seeing things, and I just like kind of kept swimming.
Yeah.
And so a few minutes pass, and I go back underwater to avoid another bat that's dive bombing me. And
So funny.
yeah, I know. And I come back up, and I'm looking in the southwesterly direction, which is kind of like back towards the house and the pool deck. And sure enough, I'm looking to where that orb of light initially went, and I see it coming back from the other direction, back towards like the northeast, going from southwest to northeast. And I was just like, yo, like, what the hell is that? Like,
Yeah.
so I was like, Mom, I'm going inside. I don't know if my mom or her friends saw it. I don't think they did, but, speaking of orbs and plasmoids, I saw one. I don't know.
Moving intelligently?
It was so fast. It was just like it zipped through the woods. It didn't like stop or do any kind of like weird movements. It was just like like it was moving with a purpose for sure. But I couldn't discern if it was, doing anything else. But it was a weird one for sure.
That is weird. That is strange, especially because I think you would be able to tell if it was just somebody with a flashlight probably walking through there.
Yeah,
I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be an orb. A flashlight would be facing a certain direction.
No.
The light would be going a certain direction.
No. And it had to have covered, at least like 1,000 to 1,500 feet in the blink of an eye, almost. It was like, that's way too fast, for a person. And I traversed those woods many times. There's no way anyone would be able to move that fast, even with like an ATV or something like that. There's too many obstacles, too many trees. So yeah, it was definitely a weird house to grow up in, for sure. But yeah. And years, well, maybe not years later, but a few years later, I had a pretty big UFO sighting. If you want to hear about that, which
100%.
I talked about this on social media pretty recently, but it was let's see, spring of 1997, and my brother took me to go see the re-release of Empire Strikes Back in the theaters. And so we
Awesome.
went into town to go see it in all its glory. And we were driving back home. It's probably about like, 9 o'clock at night. It's a clear, starry night. Um, you know, early spring in New England where I'm from. Still pretty cold, crisp nights. And so we're driving on this road, and it comes into a kind of straightaway. And as we're going down the straightaway, at the end of the straightaway, I should say, the road dips down into the woods and comes out into a river valley below. And this road hooks up with like a state highway, like a main road type of thing. And I notice, like, at the tree line, there's a set of 3 lights in a triangular formation. And the lights look like they're pretty big. And I'm like, oh man, that plane is really low to the ground, because where I'm from, there's it's a small airport. It's Burlington International Airport in Vermont. It's not that far away, but pretty familiar with where the flight path is for takeoffs and landings, and it's not in that spot. But I was still like, oh, that's like, that plane is in like a weird location. It's really low. And as the seconds go by, which seem really long because time like slowed down, because I was just like, what the hell is this thing? And I'm sitting in the back seat because like of my brother's Volvo 240, because like, I was like tired, and I was like, maybe I want to lay down, and didn't, of course. But I'm trying to figure out, like, is this a plane? Like, what's going on? And so I'm like looking around to see if there's like a weird reflection of light in the back seat on the car door window that I'm seeing. So I roll down the window. It's an old car. You gotta roll down the window. Yeah.
No buttons.
No buttons. And sure enough, those 3 lights are still there right above the tree line. And I'm starting to realize that they're stationary. They are hovering. And I was just like this is really kind of getting me unsettled. And I was like trying to get my brother's attention. I was like, hey, like, do you see that thing up there? Like, what is that? And he's like, Jeff, shut up. He like didn't want to hear it. It's funny. Turns out years later, we were like at a family reunion, and the subject of UFOs got brought up. And he was like, you remember that thing that we saw like driving home that one night? I was like, you saw that too? So it's like kind of cool.
You kept telling me to shut up.
Yeah, right. But yeah, no, we kept driving towards this thing because there was nowhere else to go. And eventually we got to the point where the road went into the woods and dipped down into the river valley. And we drove right under this thing. It was like part of it was over the road. And I remember like peeking my head out the window and looking up, and I could still see like 2 of the lights, and I could see, it was a clear night. I thought it might have been 3 different objects, but it was actually one object. You couldn't see stars in between the lights. And I was just like, one of the lights was, beyond like where I could see. It was obscured by the trees. But it was this like massive craft. Like it had to have been at least the size of a 747. And it was just sitting there silently. I couldn't hear, through the sound of the wind in my ear as the car was driving. Like I couldn't hear any kind of like hum or engine from like a jet going. Like it was just up there.
But even being that close, you'd think you would hear something.
I mean, it may have been obscured by the sound of the wind, but like I didn't hear any kind of like major sound coming from this thing. And years and years have gone by since then, of course. But anytime I mention it to people, they're like, "Oh, it was a TR-3B, experimental military craft or whatever. I'm like, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was non-human tech. I have no idea. But I saw something in the sky that night that was not any kind of conventional aircraft. That like, do we have something the size of a 747 that can hover silently for, you know, indefinitely? Like,
Yeah, I mean,
it's yeah, it's very interesting stuff. But yeah, after that point, it's just like, okay, there's stuff going on in the world here. And the unfortunate thing is that you mention this kind of stuff to people, especially back then. People are becoming more open-minded now, but a lot of people were like, you didn't see anything, like, you're crazy, type of stuff. Like, one of my best friends growing up, I told him, and he was like, oh no, you didn't, like, aliens aren't real. I'm like,
yeah,
you know but yeah, I mean, that's the kind of world that a lot of us grew up in. The ridicule and the forever skeptic and debunker life of people out there, but I know what I saw.
yeah. I know my mom used to always say, like, you don't talk about it. That's the devil stuff. Don't talk about that stuff. Don't talk about anything creepy, weird, whatever. Like, it's all devil stuff.
Interesting.
Now she's like a different tune. She now understands and things like that. But it is interesting how the times have changed from then, that they would be just like, you're only going to hear these stories like to like scare you, to creep you out type deal. And now it's just like people are just coming out sharing these things, and it's become more prevalent in that aspect that people are more willing to share and speak about these things.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just want to know the truth as to what's going on, and it seems pretty clear that there's been efforts by governments around the world, not just the United States, but all over, trying to cover up what's actually happening. I mean, you can go down all sorts of rabbit holes on that, but yeah, it's I mean, the last several years has been pretty wild to see for things happening in the sphere of disclosure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you now have like the government having full press conferences to speak about disclosure, and like, here are the things that are going on.
Right.
Now we'll talk to these things about you guys.
Right, exactly. But then, the catch-22 to that is, oh, now the government's talking about it.
Yeah.
I don't believe it.
Yeah. I'm always like, what's your angle?
Right.
What's your angle? What are you doing?
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, you've got people like Lou Elizondo, of course, and Jay Stratton, who I've met personally, that worked in the Pentagon on these programs, that they know things, and a lot of the things they know they can't say because of NDAs, and that I think hurts their credibility to some extent, because people, they want to know the truth, they want to know it now.
Yeah.
But obviously there's a process to these things, and people are risking their livelihoods, their lives, really, reputations and that kind of stuff to get information out. But of course you have to take things with a big grain of salt a lot of the times, and really kind of look into and understand the information that you're getting from these people. Yeah.
I always go off of, like, there are tons of things where it comes to real people who are sharing like what they saw in the sky, and then it's like, all right, the government comes out and they say they acknowledge these things. They acknowledge people are seeing things in the sky. They acknowledge this, but they don't really take into account like the exact thing that people see.
Right.
They're just like with the drones. Oh, it's just hobbyists. Anybody can fly a drone. We took the restrictions off for a certain amount of time, so everybody was flying something in the sky. And I'm like, these are likely excuses and not really touching what people are actually seeing. Like when it comes to these orbs or these plasmoids, like in the sky.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, for sure. There's a lot of yeah convenient things that can be and narratives that can be put into place to kind of
Yeah.
um, muddy the waters as to what's really going on.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that hits with many aspects of the paranormal. Like, you do have avid hoaxers for things when it comes to like Bigfoot or certain cryptids. So then when you actually get something that looks credible, you're like, but somebody just faked a really good one not too long ago. So how do we know? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's always uh, a mountain of BS that you have to sift through a lot of the times. And especially as time has gone on with, like I mentioned before, like AI and
Oh yeah.
CGI and that kind of stuff makes it hard to sift through. If you have a keen eye and you understand what you're looking at, I think a lot of people can catch on pretty quickly. But I do see people posting a lot of like fake stuff on social media, and people will eat
Yeah.
it up and they just believe it at face value. And you're like, well, you gotta kind of be a little more of a critical thinker here. So
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah, they do
tricky
that for just to get
thing.
those clicks.
Yes, there's a lot of clickbait out there for sure.
That's why I like you when you put out a video with certain things when it came down to drones or anything like that. When that whole alien sighting happened and there was like videos of so many angles of like this alien coming around. Um, I appreciate the fact that you're like, okay, here's an update on this. Here's an update on that. Here's what it could be. Here's another, like, you giving these types of different, like, not answers, but just suggestions on it could be this, it could be that.
Yeah. I try to, stick to the facts as best as I can with information that's available, especially for like more breaking news type of stories.
Yeah.
And, as much as I've experienced in my life, I'm also a little bit of a skeptic at heart myself. I don't just blindly believe everything out there.
Yeah.
I do know that there is some weird stuff out in the world, things that we can't explain, paranormal, alien, what have you. But you know, um, sometimes I'm presented with stuff and I'm just like, like I don't know about that
Yeah.
one. It's I think it's good to have a healthy amount of skepticism, but when you're all in on it, I think is when you're kind of treading down the wrong path, and that's when you turn into the Mick Wests of the world.
Yeah, there has to be. I think there has to be a healthy amount of skepticism when it comes to it. Because even though, like yourself, having, like us having our own experiences, even when talking about this, we're like, well, we do understand that there are other things that it could be.
Right.
There's not always 100% that this doll is going to be haunted. It's not always 100% that what you saw in the sky was a UFO. It could have been whatever, Starlink or whatever that people see a lot in the sky.
Yeah.
Um, like there are tons of things that it could be, but that also lets you weed out when there's something credible there, because it's like, well, it doesn't look like Starlink. This doesn't look like that. This is something different. Like these orbs that people see. This is completely different than just something you would see in the sky on a normal basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And it just I think takes um, educating people on things that have become more of a normal thing to see, like Starlink, for example. I remember the
Yeah.
first time seeing a Starlink chain like going over my house, and I was just like, whoa. Like people are gonna
Yeah.
think that stuff's UFOs, and sure enough, like you have a a line of satellites, like 20, 30 of them in a row. That it looks out of the ordinary, but now that they're all over orbiting all over the planet, it's like
Yeah.
you gotta kind of know what you're looking at. Yeah.
Has it? There are certain things where people say when you talk about these things, then it happens. Like speak of the devil and he shall appear type phrase. Do you find that happening with you when you talk about these things? You notice more things in the sky. You notice like things like
Um,
that.
I would say, not so much. I feel like this kind of stuff happens rather randomly. It chooses its own time to reveal itself to you. Interestingly, the last time I ever saw um, something in the sky that I couldn't really explain was back in 2020 when I had first started Strangeology. I was I was out getting a burrito up in town, and it was like late afternoon, early evening, and it was a cloudy day. And I was looking out towards, I guess it would have been towards Lake Champlain, um, maybe a little more south, and I saw this bar of light, and like the sun was towards the west, so it wasn't the sun, and it wasn't a just kind of like sitting there, this like bar of light, and I watched it. I actually have a video of it on my Instagram page. If you scroll back far enough, you'll find it.
Sweet.
I was like, oh, gotta get the camera out. I don't know what this is. It might be a plane. It might not be. Um, and I don't think it was a plane. And eventually, after you know a few minutes of looking at this thing, it eventually kind of just faded out. And I was just like, that's really weird. I don't know what
Yeah.
that was. Because like I see planes in that area all the time just because it's along the flight path for Burlington International Airport. And I've probably seen hundreds and hundreds of planes taking off and landing there
Yeah.
over the decades that I've lived here. And it didn't seem like it was a plane. It didn't even seem like it was like or like sunlight hitting a plane or reflecting, because it was underneath the clouds. So yeah, weird, weird stuff.
It was like
for
a
sure.
sign you're on the right path with Strangeology.
Hey,
Like, you should be, like-
maybe, yeah, yeah. I mean, I always feel like that kind of stuff just, you know, do, like maybe it helps a little bit if you're talking about it, but in my experience, it seems like it's just completely random. It comes to you when you least expect it. So it's like you gotta always gotta be on your toes a little bit, but not so much that you're thinking that there's something around every corner, because that's no fun.
You're being terrified of anything that could pop up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, sometimes I wish that, like, with my story that I sent you years ago, you don't even remember when now.
It was probably back in 2020, because I think that was when, or maybe 2021, because I do remember it was like a listener's stories episode that I did, and yours was included in it. And yeah, so this was a while ago.
Yeah. But I remember after seeing that, like, ball of light in the sky, and it coming down towards my car, ever since then, I'm just like, I want to see something like that again. And I have yet to see, like, the closest thing that I got to it was seeing Starlink in the sky.
Yeah.
But those are moments where I'm just like, maybe it's for the best that I don't, because that already kind of racked my brain the first time it happened. I don't need it driving me further into, like, obsession mode.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I know there's a whole like was it the ontological shock? That's like one of the big fears of like catastrophic disclosure. People like society would break down or whatever. But I don't know. I think a lot of people are ready to know what's really going on. But yeah, your story reminded me of I went out to Rachel, Nevada, back in 2018. My partner and I did this like Southwest road trip. Hit all the spots like Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, Hoover Dam, that kind of stuff. We actually went out to Contact in the desert at the tail end, the big
Oh,
conference that
sweet.
happens down in the Palm Springs area.
Yeah.
And we, you know, we're like, well, we got to go up to Area 51, of course. So we drove all the way out to Rachel, and we stopped at the little Alien, and we were, you know, it's kind of like a rite of passage for people
Yeah.
like us, and so went in there, and the guy who is running the shop, he we chatted with him for a bit, and he was like, yeah, you know, I decided to come out here and like get a job after I was camping in New Mexico, and this one evening I was stargazing, and I saw this like portal open up high up in the sky, and I saw a UFO come out and just like dart off, and I was like, what the it's like, yeah, yeah, no, for sure, dude. Like, you're in the right place. You're in the right place if you saw something like that. So yeah, it's yeah, wild stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the more, I mean, as you listen to people, even when people comment on your things, they'll comment with like, "Oh, I experienced something the same," you know. And when it comes down to those things, like when I share my story or when you shared your story, it's a crazy way to connect with people in that aspect. Like
Yeah.
sharing these stories, you're like, okay, I'm not alone in that.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
alone in kind of being into this weirdness. Because I think when you're younger, you definitely feel that sense of kind of like, not everybody's into this.
Right.
Or,
Yeah. You
yeah,
get treated like a weirdo, you know.
yeah,
But you know, embrace the weird, man. Yeah, no, it is it's cool to have that community of, you know, people that, you know, share their experiences, because it validates it for everyone else who goes through all this other stuff that can't be explained by conventional means, and that the scientific community doesn't accept as being something that uh, is out there. You know, it might not be
yeah,
tangible. We might not have the equipment to measure it in a scientific way using the scientific method, but you know, maybe someday, or maybe we're not meant to. I'm not sure. Uh, but there's something going on, and there's a lot of people that experience weird things. So, you know, it's
yeah,
good to have good to have some kind of a foundational community that you can bounce ideas off of,
yeah.
and you know, realize you're not crazy.
It's always good to not feel crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, would you say that the UFO kind of topic, the extraterrestrial topic, is like your favorite when it comes to the whole realm of this paranormal community?
Oh man. Um, you know, the that's hard to say. It's hard to say. Um, I think as far as like stuff that's more um present, and you know, stuff that's happening now that's important on a like a global scale, I would say, like, yeah, that's probably I do enjoy the cryptid stuff too quite a bit. You know, although, you know, many of the cryptid stories, the folklore is, you know, just that, it's just stories.
Yeah,
But you know, there are a few, you know, creatures and stuff that I think there is some merit to them existing, like Bigfoot, or different types of like sea monsters, and Thunderbird type sightings and stuff like that. But
oh yeah,
um, yeah, 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 it's hard to say. I mean, I love it all, but um, yeah, yeah,
yeah. I, would- I,
hard
would-
to
I, would-
say.
I would agree with that. That it's more current, like it's more of a current thing to talk about
Yeah,
these things because it's not you're not seeing the government or big news stories talking about Bigfoot, Mothman, or even ghosts in that aspect. The only thing we're going to get close to being mainstream with ghosts is like Ghost Adventures or things like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, all of the Travel Channel, History Channel shows and stuff. That's probably as mainstream as it gets, really. Which is great. I guess say what you will about produced TV shows, but um, it does bring that world to the forefront for a lot of
Yeah.
people, for sure.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really hooked me. Outside of, I had my godfather who would tell me stories all the time. We'll drive past places and he's like, this area is haunted over here. This is why. This is what people see there. And then once the TV shows came into play, like every kind of TV show when it came to UFOs and ghosts, or what was that one show that came out? I want to say it was in the early 2000s, maybe it was the late 90s. Lost Tapes,
Yeah, yeah,
early 2000s, right?
yeah. It was early 2000s. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that was like a big deal for me. I was like, this is really like, I want to learn more about each and everything that it talks about here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I grew up watching stuff like that too, like sightings, especially on like
Oh yeah.
Discovery Channel in the early '90s. Unsolved mysteries, of course, with any of
Yeah,
the
especially the ghost episodes.
yeah, the ghosts and the UFO alien episodes for
Yeah.
sure. And then there's like Monster Quest and
Oh yeah.
UFO Hunters was on in like the mid to late aughts. Uh, that was a great show. And then they got canceled after they decided to investigate Dulce Base in New Mexico.
Oh
That
yeah.
was a weird one, but yeah, yeah, yeah. No, a lot of
Yeah, I
lot
think
of lot of fun shows.
yeah, they really help with bringing. I guarantee a lot of us in this field were brought in on a lot of that, and then because once you see these things in the mainstream, you're like, I wonder if there's any more information on this, because a 45-minute television episode is only going to give you so much.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it really like you now I'm like stocked up on books. I got tons of books and things like that for all of these different subjects.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a lot.
It's endless knowledge, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I have tons of books that I've collected in the last couple of years that I haven't even had a chance to open up yet.
Oh, same here. Same here.
They're kind of more decorative pieces at this point. But hopefully, I mean, I'll go through stuff when I'm like researching for podcast episodes to like,
Yeah.
pinpoint some information. But other than that, it's tough to find the time to go through them all. But yeah, no, for sure. There's so much, a wealth of information about any kind of topic. I mean, I have like 5 or 6 books on Roswell. When I did my episode on the Roswell incident, I just like so many books on that one case. It's just like,
Yeah,
yeah.
then you can probably find even more.
Oh yeah.
Like just every one of them has like another little tidbit to like complete something. Like there's it's, like you said, it's like an endless wealth of knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so much. But
Now,
it's wonderful.
forgive me if I'm too forward, but is your partner into any of this stuff as well, or is it just like
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Not as much as me, I don't think, but yeah. I mean, she had her own experiences growing up in an old whaling captain's house in southern Massachusetts. Seeing
wow?
ghosts
Okay.
and stuff growing up. So yeah, no, yeah, she's yeah, she'll send me news stories and stuff like throughout the day.
Same with
And be
my
like,
fiance.
check this
Yeah.
out, check this out. You need to cover this. I'm like, there's so much stuff to cover. I don't know if I can, but
Yeah.
yeah. So it's super helpful.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how it is for me too. My fiance every once in a while will send a video, and she'll come across something new. Like when it came to giants, like I'm really into the subject of giants. Um, and she recently started coming up for her on both like Instagram and TikTok. And she was
Ah.
like, do an episode on this. This is crazy. And I was like, just so you're aware, I have books on this subject and we can talk about this together.
Nice.
But yeah, so she'll do the same thing and send me all these things like, do an episode on this, do something on this, talk about this.
Yeah, yeah. It's great to have that kind of support in your life because, I mean, if you're with someone that was just totally like, that's not real, like, stop being weird, like, yeah, it wouldn't work, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, she went into it. She was afraid of it all in the beginning. Um,
yeah.
but now she's fully in and will go on investigations with me and everything too. So it's been a growth since the beginning of it.
Ah, that's rad, dude. That's rad. Very cool.
Yeah. She goes a little crazy on investigations. She turns into you remember the early episodes with Zach Bagans where he would like call out the ghosts
Oh, yeah, you'd like taunt
and
them and
things? She'll
stuff.
do that sometimes. We were in a prison one time and she did the same thing. She was like, I'm the head honcho here. You all are gonna listen to me. And I was like, all right, chill out. Calm down, simmer down a little bit.
That's funny. Oh, man.
But well, that's awesome that she is also into it. Has any of your views changed from the beginning since when you first started this, or even when you were first researching before you even came up with Strangeology?
Oh,
Like, have
man.
any of your views changed?
Um, I would say that probably the biggest change in my perspective on a lot of this stuff is that there seems to be a kind of interconnectedness to a lot of Fortean phenomena,
Yeah.
like with say with Bigfoot, UFOs, the paranormal, uh, all that kind of stuff. What happens after we die? That kind of stuff. It's there's a lot of interesting recurring themes that show up with a lot of this stuff. I mean, you look into like Mothman for instance, all the high strangeness around that case with like the Men in Black and UFOs and Indrid Cold
Oh
and
yeah.
you know any number of different weird things that happened and that you know pass the buck to the Chicago Mothman, things that have been happening more recently, or the Blackbird of Chernobyl.
Yeah.
It's yeah, there's all sorts of weird stuff that seems to be somehow, a lot of it at least, is related in some way. Um, but yeah, I mean that's getting pretty John Keel with it, I guess, which he talks about in the was it the Eighth Tower, I think. But yeah, yeah, I would say that's probably my biggest kind of like perspective change. Is not these things aren't so compartmentalized. There seems to
Yeah.
be things are relate to one another in certain ways. But yeah.
Yeah, I can see that, especially when it comes down to like when you first start researching Bigfoot, and then it's like, all right, seems like it's a flesh and blood creature, just a regular type of like ape, maybe. And then it's like, what? Now there are these stories of people seeing a bright light in the sky and then seeing this creature.
Right,
And you're like,
right. You're
okay.
like, oh, like I saw Bigfoot like cloak or
Yeah.
transmogrify into a stump. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
there's like weird stories.
Or the footprints just stopping at a certain point and disappearing. Those
Yes,
things. Like,
yes, yeah. That stuff like defies explanation unless you connect it to the woo.
yeah.
That there's something more than physical reality going on. Whether it's interdimensional or something else. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always something. There's always something to it. You're never gonna get the full answer to anything, I think. all it's going to lead you is to another question for you to just kind of dive deeper into it and kind of just connect the dots.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, kind of what the job of people like us are taking on. It's try and find the answers. But, people have been trying to find the answers on this stuff for, I don't even know how long, 100, 200 years, maybe longer.
Yeah.
And we're still, the true answers still elude us. And maybe that's by design. I'm not sure. But, yeah,
We're not meant to know fully.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, man. I think this was an awesome talk. I loved hearing your stories. If you want to let everybody know where they can find you, I mean, Strangeology is pretty simple, and I think you have that on everything, right?
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Oscar, for having me on. Really appreciate it. Glad we finally worked something out. My schedule always gets a little wacky. But yeah, you can find me strangeology.com. That has all my links there. But you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, X, Threads, Blue Sky now, and YouTube as well. It's either Strangeology or strange.ology on Instagram. And yeah, you can check out my podcast, check out my merch store on Etsy. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. I mean, you work hard, man. You work hard. It's
I
tons
try.
of videos all the time. You do your show. And for anybody that doesn't know, it's hard to just crank out or even just sit there to do a video at certain times. Like
it's a
it
labor
gets
of love.
grueling sometimes. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I'll definitely put the link to your website and everything down below for everybody. Thanks again, Jeff, for coming on. To everybody watching, listening, whatever you're doing, don't forget to ask questions and face your fears. Thanks for joining me and Jeff on this episode of Induced Fear. Bye.